having me. I'm Ali, and very excited to be here. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when you reached out to me. I was very excited to have this call, and that's why I did nothing for like 2 weeks. And then yesterday I got panicked. I was like, actually, I don't have anything to talk about. Like, what am I supposed to talk about? I don't know what to say. So I hope that this presentation has something for someone maybe out there that might find interesting. I'm Ali. I do design and direction. I do CGI and photography. Currently, I work at Revolut, which is like a finance app, kind of like similar to Monzo, if you are more familiar to Monzo. I work as a in-house lead 3D designer there. I was born in Tehran. My family moved to Hamburg when I was a teenager. I went to school there. I went to university. And then just a couple of years ago, I moved to London. In high school, I studied graphic design. Well, in Germany, that's me in high school. In Germany, in high school, you have to like choose kind of like your main point of focus. And mine was graphic design, but it wasn't like a graphic design that you would learn like typography or like forms and colors like a usual, like the classic like the graphic design course, but it was more focused on the technical side, which why, for example, like for us was to learn about how do you calculate a JPEG, like a digital like JPEG file. Like if the JPEG has like 50% black in it and like 30% white, how do you actually like manually with a calculator calculate how big the size of the file is going to be? So like very technical side of the digital workflow basically. And then in university, I studied film and motion design and took a lot of photography courses. And right now, my job is kind of everything that has anything to do with design, from 2D to 3D, from like storyboarding to actually like the final rendering and animation, and even like icon design in 3D. So I'm gonna like kind of like start from very early days at university, and then gradually we're gonna end up at where I am right now in terms of like the slides and my work. So when I started university, my main focus was really like on photography, doing a lot of like architectural photography. I was really interested in just like having like a really perfect composition, walking around the city and taking a lot of like pictures, and then come back home, edit them in a way that was interesting, at least for me at the time. But looking back at them right now, it looks a little bit cheesy, like the colors and stuff, but it was like something that I found interesting at the time. This is where it would have been nice if I knew what the next slide is, but okay. So when I was in university, I was introduced to 3D. Like I've never heard of like 3D rendering before. And I was like totally blown away by it. We had this teacher, Alex Fatla, who became a good friend of mine later on. He showed us 3D like work from studios, and I've never seen anything like that before. I was like, wow, people can do this kind of stuff with computers. So I was like totally invested in it. On my free time, I would just go watch tutorials back to back, like really invested. I mean, showing this to you guys, obviously it's a joke, like as a packaging, but at the time, for me, I was like curious to see what's the possibilities of like combining like the graphic design with 3D, like what is it that I can really do? So I was very new to the 3D. So I was just really exploring what are the possibilities. And then I was still like taking some photography courses, and because until then my only thing that I was doing with photography was only focused on like just taking good pictures, that's it. But then I took this course of stage photography, where we had to like a little bit like think behind what it is actually like behind in front of the camera, but also like think about like what the concept a little bit, the storytelling of the photography. For the first time, I was like taking pictures and not only thinking about the composition, colors, but also like the storytelling of these stuff. So I was like doing a little bit of like these kind of like photography in university. And then of course I was still doing 3D. So I tried to bring the 3D that I was doing closer to the photography. And this is like where I ended up at the time with the 3D, to kind of like trying to tell the same story that I was doing saying with my photography, but this time like in CG. And like taking that a little bit like step forward and say, okay, I'm already like doing this kind of stuff in real life in photography. So now that I'm doing it in CG, maybe I should like try and do something that is a bit like more difficult if you want to do it in real life. So this is like, for example, like something like this, it would have been like harder to shoot in real life if you want to like have a person, a talent to stay like still in that position for like a few hours to get that shot. So I was like really busy with these kind of stuff and taking pictures of like garages around Hamburg, which is something that I've always like been drawn to, like really find it fascinating when people are, because usually when people like designing buildings, the main focus is on the facade in the flats itself, but no one really cares about like how these kind of how do you say the parking garages look like. So, but I find them very, very nice and funny. So yeah, I was doing these kind of stuff, and then towards the end of my studies, we had to do like a 6 months internship, and I was trying to come to London. There was already like a few good studios in London. There was one in Tokyo that I applied to, and both of these studios I got accepted to as an intern, but none of them was willing to pay for my internship. And it was like an unpaid internship. And at the time I was like, okay, sure, maybe I should get a loan and go abroad for like 6 months. It would be an amazing experience. And I had this teacher who also later on became a friend of mine, Michael Scots, who told me no matter, like, these studios were really good at the time, and I was very happy that I found an internship there. But he told me that he gave me this advice, which I found very interesting and useful. He told me that no matter how good or like big a studio is, you should never work for free, because no matter like how big, or like, because you are an intern, you still bring something on the table, and that should be rewarded. Like no matter like how big or like small your contribution to the work, it still needs to be recognized. And I actually like listened to him, and I applied to other studios, and I found an internship at VR17, which they are based in Farringdon. I don't know if you guys know them or not, but also a CG studio, design driven, and they do amazing work, really lovely people. So I moved to London for 6 months and started working on really like heavy commercial projects, like compared to what I was doing before at university, which was more like artsy, kind of like a little bit like, you don't get to work on commercial projects basically. So for me, it was very interesting to see how the progress is, like from the briefing to the like ideas, to the meetings that you have like with the clients, the concept, the production, the post-production, even everything. So, and because it was a small studio, I got to get that experience. Well, it was small at the time. I think they expanded quite a lot over the past few years. It was very nice to get involved, and I believe this is like the frames that I was doing in the R&D phase. And this one, I just like gonna show you to get an idea of like what the project was about, like the scope of it, like how big it was. And be careful, the music is a little bit like funky, and it wasn't our choice. But I'm gonna just like play just for you guys to get an idea of what kind of like projects.
The cookie you love, now it's inside. Fudge covered Oreo.
So like very kind of like short animations. And I have to say, this is a teamwork. It wasn't done just by me. It was a whole like team of like, I think 3-4 people working on it. The liquid simulation is not me. I'm not that technical. I don't have that technical knowledge of like creating liquid simulations. But for me, who didn't have any experience before, I was coming from university, it was a perfect experience. So I was very glad that I didn't really got a loan to go to Tokyo or like come to London and not only not getting paid for my work, but also like paying rent. So it was pretty good experience for me. And on the side, I was still like doing a lot of like 2D for myself, experimenting, seeing what is possible, like learning new tools, new render engines, and so on. And because I was in London, of course, I had to take these pictures and kind of like similar to the ideas that I had when I first like was in university. But I was so fascinated by the National Theatre, like the building. So I still like did some photography on the side. And then after the 6 months, I went back to Hamburg. And at the time I was kind of like starting to get some job requests from like different brands or like different people reaching out to me. And one of them was Vincent Schwenk, who, I don't know if you guys know him, but anyone who works in 3D kind of like knows him. And he's a good friend of mine. And he reached out to me. He was like, hey, are you interested to help me on this project for this Berliner club, Rita Butzke? So I said, sure, yes, because Vincent was a great inspiration to me when I first started, and he became a good mentor to me. So together we created this short animation for Rita Butzke, which I'm gonna play now.
Is it the nightclub, Ritterbutzka?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was the smiley face pill that was in the middle of it.
Exactly. So as you can see, it is kind of like quite different from what I was doing like when I was at year 17. And the reason is, I think, because it's a nightclub, of course. And another reason is that there wasn't a big budget. So usually clients, where they don't have a big budget, they tend to give you more freedom in terms of like what you would like to create. So in that sense, it was a great experience for both of us. And as you can see, it's kind of like, you can see Vincent's visual like language in this, very obvious. But I learned a lot from him because he was a freelancer, and it was good to see, okay, how does a freelancer work on its own, on his own? So for me, it was also a good experience to work on this.
How long did it take you to do that? From start to finish?
From the start to finish, I remember, I think this was quite a very short one. I think we did this only in like 6 weeks, just the two of us. Yeah.
Is that the final composition, or have you put different pieces of this together?
Yeah, no, that was the final piece. I think we didn't even do a 16:9 because it was a promotional video for Instagram.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so that is the final thing that we did. And yeah, moving on with this one. Also, like, I was still like working on my personal work and trying to not only just like do one frames, but also like thinking a little bit like further and making sets of everything that I was doing, and trying to mimic what I was like doing in photography a little bit like more, but in an abstract way. And but not always. I would love to. I would like to have like a story behind it, but also sometimes I would love to create something that has literally no meaning, because I'm a big fan of just eye candies, like really like something that just looks good. I'm a big fan. Like, I don't necessarily need to read too much into the work. Like, sometimes I go, like, this might sound very dumb, but if I go to an exhibition, I don't necessarily read all the exhibition text all the time.
Never.
So I mean, like, if the work is good enough, it should speak for itself, but I'm pretty sure I'm wrong and people are gonna laugh at me later. But so still like doing some kind of like abstract work for myself. And then I think next slides is, yes, I was in Hamburg when Man vs. Machine reached out to me, and they asked me if I was available as a freelancer. So I said yes. I moved to London, moved back to London, and I stayed for 3 months, sorry. And after that, they offered me a full-time position, and I stayed there for another 3 years. And there, I did a lot of like high-end visual, like 3D work. And one of them is this spot that we did for Bang & Olufsen. Again, this is not just me; it's a whole team of people working on this. But I was involved with the editing, with the rendering, animation, rigging. Pretty much like a little bit like everything, but of course it was a long-term project, many people involved. I'm gonna just play this now.
They're very cheap speakers.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was one of the projects that one of the first projects that I was heavily involved after I joined the team. And the team is amazing. Like the team is, you meet the most talented people there. The work is great, and these are like, the quality is always like really high end. And but one thing that is really necessary for these kind of like projects to come alive is the R&D phase that you have at the beginning of each project, where the clients give you some time to actually like get your hands on the tools and explore, just like without necessarily like following any really rigid rules. Start like exploring and creating some frames, and maybe one of these frames could come to life later on. But so just like making sure that you are exploring everything, every aspect of the job, and every ideas is being kind of like looked at. So these are like some of the frames that I did before even like getting into the animation. Yeah, so that was it. Let me see. But because I was working on a lot of like heavy commercial projects and like very product focused, I was thinking about like, okay, how can I still be like product focused, but not necessarily being too commercial? So these are like some stuff that I did on the side for myself. Like having like completely like control over everything that you have in CG is something that I think you should take advantage of, and making sure that every angle, every reflection is looking good, because that would be very hard to do in real life. So these are like some of the still lifes that I created. I have no idea what the next slide is. Always just like see. So yeah, a lot of just like eye candies for myself. I love doing these stuff. Maybe it's completely like meaningless for other people, but this is like when you are like working on projects like so like heavily like coming from the clients, like has like a really tight brief and a tight deadline that you need to follow. Sometimes it's good to just like do something for yourself, let it out, to just exercise. These are very helpful in between jobs to get your hands on the things and create just like random stuff. Another project that I really liked was this campaign that we did for Air Max Kids. It was just like creating assets and a photo shoot for them, for Nike. And our job was to come up with these like assets that you see on these photos and illustrations. And this was truly a fun project because they gave us absolutely, I think, a lot of like freedom, kind of really little feedback, and we were free to create all these like fun characters in 3D, and it was something quite different from what I usually do. but it was very refreshing to get to work on stuff that is a bit out of your comfort zone, I would say.
I like the caterpillar. The one before. I think it was on the page before. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was quite fun to work on this. And one thing that I love to do is during the R&D phase, I would love to sometimes like take a step back from what the clients are telling, like what is the brief, and just like do something completely different. Of course, this has been a part of the R&Ds and client that even hasn't even seen these. But for myself, it's sometimes good to just like take a step back, do something completely different from what they are asking for. And maybe something comes out of it later, maybe not. But at least I know that I'm having some fun with it. Another project that we worked on was a car commercial for Mini, and basically they asked us, can you make this car dance? And this, we were like, sure, yes. And this is like one of the tests R&Ds that I did. I'm gonna play it. It's like a little bit longer. It's like 30 seconds, but let's just have a look. So this was like kind of like what client wanted to see, like a car that is doing a little bit of dance. But in my head, when they said a car needs to dance, I was imagining something else. And that's like something that I love to do again, to do something completely different from what they're asking, just to entertain myself, just for myself. And this is like what I came up with.
That's amazing. It's so mad.
No.
So in my head, when they said dancing car, this is how I saw it. And like at the end of the day, usually I would just like create something just as a joke and put it on the server, sometimes even without any names, just for people to say it and maybe have fun. Moving on with more like personal work, I have more like projects, like commercial projects that I have done. You can find them on my website or like Behance, but for the sake of the presentation and the time, I didn't put everything inside. Again, like doing CG, I always like try to do something that is not necessarily easy to mimic in the real life. For example, like, of course, it's possible to take a shot like this in real life, but in CG, for these kind of stuff, it's a lot easier to have like a very wide angle and put it inside like a fan. So I love to explore with these kind of like ideas, and maybe someday they might come in handy for another project for a client. And this is more recent renders that I have done. And when I first started doing 3D, I was always trying to make my renders as real as possible, to add more like imperfections to them, like scratches, and make them look as real as possible. But I guess like over the past few years, people have seen more of like 3D renders. And now I have seen that a lot of like photographers are retouching their photos so much that it looks like a render. And so I'm saying, we are already in CG, then we might as well just have it like as perfect as possible. Like for example, like on this one, this might sound very technical, but it does the shader, it doesn't have any scratches. It's just like pure, like it looks almost like a 2D image. And this is like something that I have seen like photographers are doing to make their photos like 3D. So why not, when we are in 3D, just like maybe we should just like keep it that way as just a test. And yeah, another like more like experiments that I do with 3D. Sometimes I start like something in VR. For example, this one was I bought a VR set. I used it for 2 weeks and never touched it again. So this is what happened when I had my VR set. And then over the past like few months, I when I was working at MAMV and was working on like a lot of like heavy CG projects, kind of like I didn't get to do lots of photography over the past like few years. So recently I started like picking up photography again and making my photography like closer to my 3D, because when I first started, I was trying to make the 3D look like my photography, but now I'm trying to make the photography look like my renders, kind of like a full circle. And these are like the results of some of the still lives photos that I created over the past few months. And sometimes people ask me, are these renders or are these photos? And it makes me actually really happy, because it tells that I maybe I did my job to make people question whether these are real or not. And this is the end of my presentation. I don't know if this is the length you guys were expecting or not. These are and with this, I want to also, like, for the first time, I want to put it out there, because I know this is going to be recorded. I'm going to be available for freelance very soon in September. So just put it out there.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you. Happy to hear your thoughts, questions, any concerns. I don't even see my cursor anymore. Oh, there you go.
Thanks for all of that.
Yeah.
I like how your photography style has changed since university, but there was still quite a lot of consistency behind what you were doing at the beginning of uni, and then when you moved to London, in terms of the kind of the style of photography, still feeling slightly hyper realistic.
Yeah.
And so in your as you kind of gone back into looking at photography now, and you've said that you want to almost make your photography look like 3D work, does that mean that there's going to be a shift in how you start to design in 3D as well?
Well, I mean, like, that really depends, because right now the 3D work is really dependent on like clients' work, like what they are asking for. But like on my free time, I'm like trying to bring them like as close as possible together. Hopefully, yeah, there might be some shift. Maybe I will learn something that I'm doing in like photography, and maybe I can like again go back to 3D and try to do the same thing. So yeah, I don't know really, to be honest.
So you're I'm guessing if you're going for freelance, maybe depending on your answer, we might edit this answer out. So are you leaving Revolut now then?
Yes, yes. So I can't really talk much about like what I was like doing there, but one of the reasons that I went in-house for a brand was mainly for the experience, to see how a brand really works from inside, like a brand like as big as like Revolut, with like I don't exactly know how many people, like how many users. I think like 5 million users. A really big company, and to see, just like learn how brands are working from inside, and also like to learn how, because Revolut was using a lot of 3D as a like incorporated in their brand identity, and so that is something that I didn't have any experience before. So I thought it was a good idea for me to go there with no experience and try to work on incorporating 3D more into the brand identity. But hopefully over the next few months, I can show and share more stuff about that.
Oh, cool. Has anyone got any questions before I go in?
Yeah, I've got one, which is kind of related to what James was saying, actually. Do you think that grounding in sort of photography to understand, I suppose, lighting and sort of composition gave you a bit of an advantage when you sort of started to translate that, or started to work more in CG stuff?
Absolutely. I think it really helps when you actually like hold the camera if you have held the camera in your hand and you do have experience of like simple, like, it doesn't have to be anything like crazy, like advanced techniques, but if you know how shutter speed works, how like light bounces, that kind of like focal length, all these kind of stuff. If you know how a camera works, because essentially 3D is exactly like mimicking that. So if you know how to use it, you do have a really good understanding of the space, lights, and composition. So yeah, it did really help me when I first started, because I felt like, okay, this is kind of like similar to photography, but it's a way more technical.
Yeah. And just more of a sort of curiosity, I noticed like through the progression of your work, there are a lot of legs that feature. So I didn't know whether you had a leg thing. I once got told, by a 3D like animator that legs are one of the hardest things to actually do, particularly when you put into a motion context as well. I don't know whether that's true or not, but
yeah, like hands, like anything like human, like anatomy of like humans is very, very hard too, like especially like hand animation. Like the thing that I showed in the spot for the Bang & Olufsen, it was very hard to just like one click. It took ages to animate that. So yeah, it's very, very hard and time consuming to get it right. And it never like looks good. Like it always, there is some like, it looks mechanical. Like no matter how hard you try, it will never like mimic the exact like the hand movement that you would get in real life.
Go on, got one answer, then I'll shut up.
I hope that answered your question.
No, yeah, definitely. But having seen Toby's kind of setup when he's doing 3D, I suppose my only comparison is like when I sort of have made music and used like computer programs to make music, is my only sort of parallel in a way, because I'm not a designer, by the way. I sit on the strategy side of stuff. And with that, you can obviously get to a really interesting sort of creative output very quickly. So you kind of get an essence of what you're doing. You're quite kind of in flow, and you almost can create a full circle of a song within 4 hours. From what I've seen, what Toby's doing and how you're talking about stuff, to do what you're doing from a kind of CG point of view is such a long period of time. How do you kind of retain the sense of like creative focus around an idea and an execution if it's sort of extrapolated out over such a long period of time?
Yeah, because we can kind of, Toby's the only person whose focus is 3D in the studio. And I think obviously when we're working in brand, it's far easier to make an expression quite quickly. We can make a mark, move on. But actually, if you're trying to do that in 3D, it's excuse the poor terminology here. I've been trying to learn from Toby, but I'm not very good. The modeling, the rendering, the rigging, the lighting, the textures, the bucket renders. Have I done well? Is that it's a lot, in line with what you're saying, it's a lot longer to get to something. So like, I suppose I know from monitoring when Toby works, very kind of locked in. But if it takes such a long time to get to a kind of intended output, how do you find your process of keeping in that kind of flow or kind of like path, getting to that point? Because I can imagine like the logical side of my brain, I always speak to Toby when we're talking through work as if it was as easy as just moving a light bulb kind of to a slightly different place, but it isn't as easy as that. So,
but it's also like, the creative energy you have on one day can be very different to the creative energy you have on another day, right? And that mood that you're actually putting into something can be so different, but you've actually got to retain the consistency of it over such a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, I mean, that's very true. Like working on especially like on a bigger projects is very hard to like keep that energy, as you said, because you end up like sometimes also like in feedback loops from like clients and stuff like that. But I think what I usually do, and this is different for everybody, like everyone has a different approach to 3D. But it's important to take baby steps, like taking first to work on the animation and get that right. You get a feeling of okay, this is moving good. Okay, now let's focus on how does it look like. Okay, now it's starting to look good. But let's focus on the textures, all these steps that you mentioned. I usually take them by step and focus on them right one after the other. But also it's very important to have a good pre-production also to know exactly what you are after. have a good solid references, mood board, what is it exactly that you want to achieve, and then just like focus on it and get it done over the, but also like you need to know that it's a time consuming process, and it's always okay, it takes some time to get there to a point that it's decent enough, your work. Like you do the first iteration, the first day, you might think, okay, it looks good, but then you try to do it again tomorrow, it looks even better. So the more time you spend on it, the more love you give to the thing, the better it gets. So that's why like it's important for like especially like 3D works to be able, because working with clients, they usually don't have a sense of like how the CG production really works, you know. So that's why it's important to ask for more time, because the more time you have, I mean, of course, it's for branding, any job is like that. The more time you have, the better it gets. I guess that's like, it's good to like always like calculate extra time when you are budgeting or like trying to get a project to work on the timeline.
So when you're doing your little experiments, the bits that you say is eye candy but have no purpose, I don't know exactly how you expressed it, but they look cool anyway.
Great, yeah.
When you're doing that, how do you approach it? Are you approaching it through, I've seen this technique, I really want to try it and see where it goes? Or have you got an idea in your head of what you're trying to create, but you're not fixated on what the outcome looks like?
I would say it's a both, like it's a bit of both. Like sometimes it's something that I see like online or like in real life. I take a lot of like inspiration from photography, but also like sculpture, or like random stuff on the streets. But sometimes I see something and it sparks an idea, and I think, okay, maybe I could take something from that and then combine it with something else that I have done before, so that it has a little bit touch of like my input as well. But also sometimes I look specifically for some references to get something like to work with, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
It's kind of like a little bit of like both.
I've got a question actually.
Sure.
I'm supposing with your background in photography, I mean, my question is more, what do you do for referencing? Do you tend to look like at digital spheres, or are you more referencing actual real life things? Like I can imagine if you're having to do liquids.
Are you like asking specifically like for photography work, or
no, for like 3D mostly?
Oh yeah, so that's a good question actually, because mostly I get my references or like inspirations from photography or like films. Rarely I look at other 3D works, because then you might end up like creating something that is just like so out there. So mostly I get the inspiration from photography, film, and like sculpture or anything out there.
Do you have like a crazy folder in your computer with like extremely labeled and detailed
Actually,
categories?
I know a lot of people have that, but unfortunately I don't have that. Like I wish I had like a really big board on like Pinterest or like Arena or something like that. But my boards are very messy. I really don't, because I get like fixated on like one idea. I work on it, and then that's it. I don't like collect ideas so that I can come back to them, if that makes sense. Especially for myself. But I get board for like commercial projects that I can show to clients to show them. But for myself, it's completely like opposite of how I work with clients.
Cool, thanks for that. Are you guys having any other questions on the other side?
The question: have you how have you found the difference between client side and agency side in terms of creativity? So client side and agency, I think it's a very different approach, because on the client side you kind of like build a friendship, a relationship with them is very different than like when the client comes to the agency. So I think it's a very more collaborative way of working in-house, but at the same time it can also be a little bit like more how do you say, more difficult, because you're always there. The iterations, like everything like gets repeated and repeated, and there are so many like people involved, where if you are I'm not sure if I'm actually answering the question correctly, but but for example, like the yeah, where if you're at the agency, the things that like you work on, you get into the right like mindset about like the creative mindset, and you work on the thing, and you have like a few rounds of like feedbacks with them, which is not necessarily like the same as when you are in-house.
That makes sense.
I don't think I did make sense, but
No,
yeah.
it does. I think I feel like probably in house you've got so many voices and things.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I would say like maybe in an agency like a studio, you do have a little bit like more creative freedom.
I think we've got one other question. I feel like
Yes, sorry.
I'm hosting a live Twitch. Are there any areas or disciplines you'd like to apply your work to that you haven't had the chance to do so yet, such as typography within brackets?
Yes, actually, like typography is something that we have done when I was working at my previous job. We did a lot of like as a small like assets in as a part of like a packaging, as a part of like package for the clients. A lot of like typography, like kinetic, like the typography, 3D types and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm actually really interested to work on like a lot of like graphic design focused 3D, or like visualizing like 3D graphic identity, like packaging work. But what other areas? Maybe something that I have very little experience also is maybe like stage design, like visuals for musicians, or when they are like performing, something like that. But that's just something that I have very small experience. I think that could be cool.
Sweet. Are you guys typing still? Yes. Have you ever taken your 3D work into physical form?
No, haven't had a chance. Like I never had a chance to look into like 3D printing and anything like that. I would love to, but I never had to look into like 3D printing stuff. I know nothing about 3D printing, to be honest, but I see some people doing 3D works and it looks very fascinating. But the quality of like 3D printing, it will never be as like high end as like you would do in CG. But maybe that's like, if I had like someone to manufacture them in a different way, sure, yeah, definitely, like working with people who can manufacture them, make them in good quality.
Isn't it, guys, just wave if I'm wrong or right, but isn't it also Max Altman that does actual physical thing from his 3D, or am I dreaming?
Yes, I think so. I think so. A lot of like 3D designers are doing a lot of like 3D printing, or at the studio in Barcelona 6 and 5, they do a lot of like physical sculptures, like chairs and stuff like that. But I have no idea how to approach these kind of stuff, like who to reach out even to even like pitch my ideas to see if anyone wants to build them. I don't think anyone would be interested. Max does small sculptures. Yes. Yeah. I don't know how he does it, to be honest. Is it a 3D printing or?
Isn't it ceramics? Molds.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I remember some stuff with resin and things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
I'll speak for them, but thanks.
Thank you so much.
With us.
Have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.